the stage, Sean McDowell.
Am I in trouble if I come down here? A little closer? Even better. All right. Well, it is good to be here. You ever sat on a flight and they stopped, they boarded everybody, and they said, well, bad news, which never is a good way to start a conversation. The flight has been canceled, and we have no other airlines to back this up. We're sorry. I'm thinking, that's it? They said, well, you'll be on a flight that we get here about 8:30. I said, well, you might as well send me back to California. And I managed, like you said, to get the very last seat on a U.S. Airways flight. So it was a middle seat, and I could have cared less. I don't think I've ever been so thankful to have a middle seat in my life, actually, come to think of it. The chance to be here with you guys today and kind of cap off this conference that I hear things are going great for you. So thank you for letting me be here today. And thank you for singing that wonderful song. That was fantastic. Appreciate that. I used to be a cell phone minimalist, just get the simplest phone that wouldn't break. But when these smartphones started coming out and I started traveling, I had to have one. So a few months ago, I take that back. A couple summers ago, I was in line when the new 3G iPhone first came out at a mall in Southern California. I was traveling Friday, so Saturday, the day after it came out, I got in line. Well, I got there about 11 or 12, and the line went out of the store and down about 4 or 5 stores. So I sat there about 4 hours before I got my phone. And as I'm sitting there, some students, high school students, come walking up to the person right next to me. And this is what they said word for word. They said, hey, we're talking about Jesus, what do you think? He doesn't say a single word. He turns around, leans on the railing, and completely ignores them. So they get up to walk away, and I said, hey, what are you guys doing? They said, well, we're talking about Jesus. What do you think? I said, you know, I don't even think he really existed. Do you? And they said, well, of course we do. It's right here in the Bible. It says he's the Son of God. They start preaching me. I said, well, wait a minute. Why should I believe that that story is true? They said, well, it's in the Bible. The Bible's true. I said, why should I think the Bible's true? They said, well, because it says right here in Timothy that all Scripture is inspired. I said, well, that's an odd argument. If you want to know if the Bible's true, you can't use the Bible to prove the Bible. Mormons and Muslims do that. I said, do you have any evidence? The guy said, sure. He said, you know, there's these thousands of ancient manuscripts that completely agree on what was originally written down. I said, really? Do you know how many words are in the original Greek New Testament? And at this point, I know exactly what he was thinking. Why did I have to talk to this guy? He said, no. I said, there's about 136,000 words. I said, if you take all of the words, all the different manuscripts, you know there's about 300,000 to 400,000 variants or different words that could have been put in the New Testament. That means for every word, there can be 2 or 3 other words. Now, a minute ago, you said they completely match up, so can you explain this to me? He goes, what do you think about evolution? I said, I'm glad you asked. The evidence is overwhelming. Don't you know we have vestigial structures in our backs left over from our ancestors who had tails? Have you seen in embryological development how it mirrors the Darwin's tree of life? Have you seen in human DNA? And I go on and on, and the guy's eyes are getting bigger, and he's just backing up like this. I stopped, and I said, you know what? I got a confession to make. I'm a Christian. And I wish you were there or I had it on camera, because it goes like this. He goes, oh. And then a girl standing next to him, it took her a minute to get it out. She kind of like fumbled a little bit and said, was all that true? Was what you said true? I said, well, some of the points were true, but the conclusions I drew didn't really fall from the points I made. I said, I'm a Christian. Part of being a Christian is I think the Bible's true. I said, part of being a Christian is I don't believe in Darwinian evolution. I believe there's an intelligent designer behind life. I said, good for you guys. On Saturday in July in Southern California, being out sharing your faith. But don't you think if you're going to go talk to people about Jesus, maybe you should know a little bit why what Jesus said, that he actually said what you're claiming that he said? If you're going to go tell people they should believe in the Bible, shouldn't you have some good reason the Bible's true? If you tell people the world was designed, shouldn't you have some good evidence for it? They agreed. We had a great conversation. They went on their way. I was facing this direction. About 10 minutes later, I feel a tap on my shoulder. I turn around, and it's 3 new students. So I start launching into my charade. They just got the worst of me sitting in line for 4 hours. Until I look over their shoulders about as far back as this room is. The original students had set up their friends to go convert the atheist. Now, you all know students who would do that, don't you? And I love to ask young people, I say, what do you think would happen to those students who love God with their heart and who love God with their strength, but don't really know why they believe what they believe? When they have a professor who they all deem as just being so knowledgeable and intelligent, either directly or subtly critiques the Bible, many of them will walk away. I believe in my work with young people that apologetics and worldview is not just important for this generation. It's more important than any generation that we've had in American history. It is one of the most critical and foundational things we must do to reach and equip this generation. But tonight, I want to talk about one way that I believe ministry as a whole and apologetics to this generation must change. Let me illustrate this. I do take my students on apologetic mission trips to Berkeley. We're doing a Muslim outreach this year. We're going to Saudi Arabia. I'm just kidding. We're going to LA. There's more Muslims in LA than anywhere else in the United States. There's tons of them. We go to Salt Lake City. And we also had a student debate. My students debated a local free-thinking atheist club. Really cool, a few weeks ago. And we had some of the students come over before a previous debate we did to my classroom. Some free-thinking students and my students for about 2 or 2.5 hours. We sat there, dialogued, and debated issues. It was really fun. And I'll never forget at the end, a student said something that I hear and read so often said by this generation. He stopped and it's like he was giving us wisdom on the whole event, the high school student. He said, you know, he said, maybe your views are true for you. And maybe our views are true for us. Why can't we both be right? And his buddies kind of smirked and smiled like they had just made this profound insight about truth. If you work with young people for about 5 minutes, you'll hear from Christian and non-Christian students many times some kind of derivative about that, won't you? Now, they don't say it about math or about science, but when it comes to morality or it comes to religion, there's this idea that whatever you believe is true for you. In fact, there's a study in Newsweek magazine, came out September 27th, 2010, and it said that 80% of Americans believe that people of other religions can go to heaven. 80%. So in other words, when it comes to religion, there's not really a truth that we have to believe that matters. Whatever works for you, whatever you personally believe, is fine. You see, I heard Tim Keller say we not only have to do apologetics for this generation, we have to do an apologetic for truth itself before we can reach this generation. See, I think young people care about truth. I think the way we're wired by God is that truth matters. We can't get outside of it. But somehow when it comes to religion and morality, we set truth aside. See, we know truth is important. Many of you will recognize this picture. You remember this story, this book, A Million Little Pieces, by James Fry. Here's the cover. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago it came out. And as soon as Oprah put it on her book of the month, it sold 1.7 million copies. The only book in the U.S. that sold more was the Harry Potter book that was released that year. Besides the Bible, of course. 1.7 million copies. But what happened is they started to investigate this book. Some of you remember what happened, don't you? It was made up. It was fabricated. He completely lied about these stories to sell copies. Well, he defended himself by saying it was the emotional truth. And when Oprah first got confronted about it, she said, this is much ado about nothing. But then people kept pressing her and kept pressing her. So she brought him back on the show. Some of you probably saw this, especially the guys who watch Oprah. Some of you saw this, and she confronted James Fry on her show. You know what she said stuck with me? She said this exactly. She said, I left the impression that truth is not important. Why was there such an outcry about this story? Because truth is important, isn't it? Nobody wants to be lied to. Nobody wants to be deceived. We know because of the way God made us, being in his image, that truth is important. In fact, in her book, if you haven't read this book and you want an insight into culturally what's going on, I would consider Nancy Pierce a modern-day Francis Schaeffer. Brilliant insight. She talks about the secularization of our culture in there. And she cites a study. And she says, why is it that mainline churches have declined in their enrollment and many conservative churches have inclined? She said the difference is their commitment to objective truth. That's the difference. Whether you believe at the basis there is such a thing about truth that can be known, made the difference in church growth according to the study. That's pretty powerful, isn't it? So why does truth matter? Let me give you 3 reasons very quickly why I think it matters for this generation so much.